Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webinar. We're going to get started so that we can make the best use of your time today. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions as we go throughout the session, please feel free to ask us in the chat box as we go, especially if you're having connectivity issues. Thank you for joining us today for Working Outside the U.S. and a webinar sponsored by the Washington, D.C. Alumni Network for University of Massachusetts Amherst. We're excited today to have several panelists with us to be able to share their insights and experiences working abroad and to be able to answer your questions that you've brought today to the session. Thank you for joining us. A few webinar basics. On your screen as an attendee, you should see the settings, Q&A, and chat box there that I've circled in red. When you click on the chat box, you'll be able to submit a question either to all of the panelists or to all of the panelists and the attendees. So we ask that you please do that at any point during the session so that we can get your questions in and we can ask them of the panelists. All attendees today will be on mute during the presentation to enable everyone to hear the presenters. Today's session will be recorded and later added to our online video library of career resources. By joining today's session, you're giving consent to be part of a recorded session. If you have any questions at any time, please use the chat box to communicate with us, and we want to assist you so you can make the most out of the session today. The team here in the room helping on the side of the webinar to keep everything moving. My name is Karen Schultz-Battistoni. I'm the Manager of Professional and Alumni Volunteer Services. I have Stephanie Subach with us here as well. She's the Regional Alumni Officer for East and West Coast Networks, and she is the one that works with the Washington, D.C. network that's sponsoring today's session. And then Mackenzie Yell, she's the Professional Volunteer Services intern that's going to be working with me as we collect all of your questions during the session. So that's the team on our side. Today's session, we're going to have the panelists each introduce themselves. Then we're going to start with a bit of a general overview. Dan Preischer will talk about living abroad and some general information and resources. And then we'll get to your questions about working abroad. So the main bulk of the session is really going to be guided by you and your questions and inquiries. One thing to note, we do acknowledge that working outside the United States can be a little bit complicated given work regulations, immigration, and visas. Each person's situation is different. We intend for today's information to not be comprehensive. We encourage you to seek out additional information that is specific to you and your citizenship and the work regulations in the country where you plan to work. For our attendees today, they're U.S. citizens, so their experiences may vary from somebody else based on citizenship, the country, and the nature of the work involved. So today's panelists, these are the 6 individuals who have agreed to share with us today some of their insights and to talk with you all. I'm going to turn it over to them and to their video and allow them to each introduce themselves. We'll start with Shawn and we'll go alphabetically. So just give me one moment and we'll pull up. Okay. So Shawn, would you like to start?
Sure, thanks, Karen. My name is Shawn Content. I work for a company called Harding Loevner, and I've been, it's an investment management company, and I've been living and working in London since January of last year, so a little over a year now.
Great, thanks, Shawn. How about Chris?
Hi, everyone. Let's see, I graduated from UMass with degrees in Chinese language and literature and cultural anthropology of East Asia. So I had already studied abroad in China and Beijing and in Taiwan. After graduation, I moved back, initially as a student, and then did a variety of jobs over the years, moving myself around the region, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, working as a journalist and so was a marketing consultant, and ultimately ended up working with the Walt Disney Parks organization in Hong Kong, Australia, and ultimately in Tokyo before I relocated back to the US.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Richard?
Sure. So my name is Richard Lepke. I also graduated in 2011, which is farther away than I'd like to pretend it is. After college, I took a role with United Technologies Corporation doing their financial leadership program. So the first year I was in Hartford, Connecticut, so not the most exotic location, but after that I did rotation in Singapore, which really opened my eyes to how amazing it is to work and live overseas. I came back and did a final rotation in Charlotte, North Carolina, before off-placing into like a permanent type of role in corporate finance, doing supply chain finance and strategy analytics in San Diego, California. So, just domestically, I got to live a few different places in that role. And then I was in Singapore at the time. After about 3 years, or 2 years rather, in San Diego, I left United Technologies to work for a company called Hologic, which is a women's health diagnostics and biotech company. So since then, I've taken on 2 different roles, and now I'm currently a manager of international financial planning and analysis. So if you think about your curriculum, probably the corporate finance track is sort of what I do. And I'm in London, and I've been here since June of last year.
Great. Thank you. Matt?
Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Pelican. I graduated UMass in 1997. I had originally studied psychology, had a degree in psychology as well as a degree in communications. Had gotten into, I was working in radio, formerly working at WMUA as a student, and eventually made a shift in the late 90s, 1999, to the online space. Kind of evolved through there, living in Boston, living in New York, living in Los Angeles, and 2010 decided that for the work that I did at that point, I had decided to go off on my own and be self-employed. I decided I didn't need to be kind of held down to one location. So started really traveling a lot more, working remotely while on extended vacations. And eventually in 2010, I just packed 3 bags, grabbed the dog, and moved to Argentina. And in 8 years later, I'm still living a similar lifestyle. I picked up a wife and a child along the way, but pretty much still remains the same, that I've been working mobilely now from Argentina, and then moving to Santiago, Chile, to Zagreb, Croatia, Barcelona, and as of a month ago, back in Santiago, Chile. So that's my story.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Dan?
Wow, this is fascinating stuff. My name's Dan Prescher. I'm the guy with no number behind my name because my wife and I got our journalism degrees from University of Nebraska sometime in the early 1980s. And at the end of the 90s, we decided that we didn't want to spend another winter in Omaha, Nebraska, which is where we were both born and raised. And my wife had been an avid reader of a little publication called International Living. So we got the idea that we could probably do something from a place where the weather wouldn't kill you during the winter. And in 2001, we went to Quito, Ecuador, did our first 2 years there. And in the ensuing 17 years, we've been in 4 different communities, 7 different communities in 4 different Latin American countries, from Ecuador to Panama to Nicaragua to 3 places in Mexico. And we're currently Mexican residents. We're writers and content providers. I do some emceeing of International Living conferences that are held about 6 times a year throughout Latin America and the rest of the world. And we haven't lived in the States since 2001.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan. Sophia?
Thank you. Really inspiring stories. But my name is Sofia Yavorski. I also graduated from UMass Amherst in 2011. I studied journalism and political science with a little bit of communications here and there. I don't know if there are any UMass Amherst students on this webinar or not, but I ended up interning while I was at UMass for Sut Jolly, and I'm sure a lot of people know who he is. And I kind of got the production bug a bit. So after I graduated, I was looking for production work and ended up in New York City working for the Walt Disney Company, specifically doing product placement for ABC Television Network and then later ABC Family, which has since rebranded itself to Freeform. And I actually ended up having a bit of a change of careers and working for the New York Palace Hotel. It's a luxury hotel in New York City, still doing marketing, but more of the digital path. And my husband, Shawn, who's labeled as Sofia Yavorsky below, he was actually the one who was relocated to London for work. So I actually have the opposite side of the spectrum where I had I went through the process of finding work abroad, coming over. Actually, we weren't married at the time, and coming over as a visitor and my experience with that. I'm actually dialing in from my job in London, and I work now for a company called Steelcase. It's a US-based global company though, and we basically research what makes people the most productive in the office, and how do you bring out their creativity and make your people more productive, and we design workspaces based off of that. So I'm happy to say that I do have a job in London. So
wonderful. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, everybody, for taking a moment to introduce yourselves. Dan, would you like to start us off by giving some introductory thoughts on living abroad and different kinds of resources?
Sure. The company that I work for right now, my wife and I both write for International Living and Travel for them, has been in the business for about 38 years, introducing mostly seniors and retirees to the idea of making fixed incomes and pensions go as far as possible by living outside the United States, picking a place where the cost of living is lower, the weather is better, you just lower your expenses and make fixed incomes go farther. Susan and I have been doing that for 17 years. And over the course of those years, our demographic has been getting younger and younger, more families, more working people are moving abroad. I put that down to the internet. For people who live the expat life like Susan and I have been doing for the last 17 years, the internet has changed everything. There are now a wealth of careers that are what we call transportable careers, things you can do from anywhere on the planet where you have a fast internet connection. And that's just changed the game for anybody who's dissatisfied with where they're living right now for whatever reason. The weather may be bad. The opportunities may not be legion. The cost of living may be too high. You may just have a sense of adventure and you want to go out someplace and try another culture, do something different. Over the last 17 years, we've seen the demographic for that expand exponentially. And I think it's because it's not an exotic idea anymore. Look at what we're doing here today. I mean, we're from all corners of the world. We're talking to each other about the idea of living abroad and working abroad. And obviously, I'm sold on it. We've been doing it for 17 years. We have no plans to stop now. We're serial relocators. So every year or two, we get the bug to try another place. And each time you try it, it gets a little easier. You guys may have different experiences, but I don't think we're done moving, and we're certainly not done working abroad. It's become a lifestyle for us.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan. So why don't we start off with a question I think that a lot of people ask, and some of it you may have already covered in your introduction, but what was the process you used for finding and securing a job outside of the US? I'm not sure who would like to start, but feel free to jump in.
I'll add something. This is Matt. I know for me, I've always taken, well, to go back to the beginning, I have kind of two different stories. I have my original story of how it all started, and then how it's been since I've been married. I married a diplomat from Chile. So now even if I liked where I'm living, I am a serial relocator because of needing to relocate based on my wife's mission postings. But when I started, I was really just factoring in, it was a little bit of adventure, It was a little bit of just looking at cost of living. And for me, it was about making a decision to move to Argentina as my first move and really factoring everything in. I really can't stress this enough about always doing your research, but sometimes you have to factor in some of the most basic elements. Like I was deciding, do I want to live in Barcelona or do I want to live in Buenos Aires? And I did the math, and at the time it was a 4-to-1 exchange rate on the Argentinian peso, and it was a 1-to-2 exchange rate, the dollar to the euro. And I said, do I want to work twice as hard to live in Barcelona, or do I want to be able to just go with my existing clients and move from the US to Argentina? Well, that's the decision I made. And by doing that, it enabled me to secure employment there as well. So then it's really just doing the research, something that Dan touched on, really focusing on the internet and really just going through the same process that you would go through at home in your home city in the United States of looking abroad for work. And be surprised how many jobs are out there, even if you don't know the language, that there are still people looking for, in certain fields at least, people who are native English speakers, and you'll find job postings, and you can really just begin your traditional method, see what's out there. If you don't see enough job volume, then maybe if you are really doing it based on just adventure, you look elsewhere and you see what opportunities exist.
Do others want to jump in on explaining the process?
Did somebody just say they would jump in?
Okay, sorry, Chris. You had to back up. I had a problem with the mic. I apologize.
Okay, no problem. So when I graduated in the 80s with a degree in Chinese, that was a pretty useless degree in the United States at that point. The same was Japanese then. But having already been abroad to Taiwan, to Beijing, I already had some knowledge to go with. Yeah, doing your research is a smart thing. I was fortunate to do my research while I was still in university, which is probably a luxury that most people on this call don't have at this point. So I agree with what Matt said. You do need to do your research. Where do you want to go? Look at the lifestyle that you'd be living there and think about that. For me, I went with a duffel bag and just hit the bricks. I started out on a student visa, which is what a lot of Chinese students do in the United States. And then you just need to parlay that into a job. Obviously, there's lots of under-the-table paid jobs like teaching English, and that's where I started out. But then as you develop your confidence and your skills and a bit of a network, you can find yourself into other areas. For example, in places like Taiwan, there is a demand for English speakers. They have English speakers too, but English speakers, native English speakers, Americans are a bit inscrutable to people in China. And so they have a term called blue eyes speaking to blue eyes. Even though you speak English, speaking English to an American is sometimes daunting, and they're more comfortable with another person from the United States doing that interface. So that opened a lot of doors for me. But again, the other thing to bear in mind is that for a lot of countries, if you're going to work there, if you're going to be able to secure a work visa, you need to prove that you have a skill that they can't source locally. That could be language, and often it's language at the outset of your career, but as you develop your skill sets, you have more to leverage, whether it's your marketing experience, your sales experience, your technical experience. You need to have something that sets you apart from the local population, because there is pressure not to hire a foreigner in some places when a local can do the job.
I definitely agree with that. It's all about kind of really narrowing down where you want to live and what skills you want to apply. I would say, based on my my light turned off in here, so I'm in the dark, but based on my personal experience, I would say Steelcase as a company, because it is so global, our European headquarters is located in Munich, and almost everybody there speaks German, English. There's, well, because we're a global company, there are people in Hong Kong, there's a group in Singapore. There's a group just all over the place. And knowing another language is a very, very important skill that I actually really wish that I had. I think that that would have helped quite a bit as far as finding a job goes. I also think that in the UK, it's quite similar to being in New York or Boston or the US as a whole. And so if you do happen to have a skill, what they call skilled labor, then that is very, very great. If, for example, if you are a doctor or you're in engineering, it's really helpful. I think where I struggled a little bit is having that marketing background. It's not necessarily something that they lack in the UK. So I did have a bit of trouble with that, but that's not to say, because London is kind of similar to the US, not to say it's impossible, but there are other parts of the world where they could totally use that skill. I was a bit limited because Shawn was transferred here for work. So
Yeah, on that note, this is Matt again. On that note, I can relate. In 2006, I was researching moving from Los Angeles to Australia. So I went through the process, found a job, actually got the job offer, ultimately declined because of a personal situation at home, just being in a relationship and not ready to just terminate it. But again, at that point in time, by 2004, I had already risen to a director level title in the work that I did while I was still working directly with clients. And that enabled me to be in what was called a highly skilled migrant program for Australia. Australia is a country where it's not always ideal for long-term working immigrants. Mostly, it's very easy to get a short-term visa, but long-term visa is a little bit more difficult. But I was instantly put in this fast track for the highly skilled migrant program just because of having that background. So again, it depends on the country, and with a background, if you are able to get yourself established in what you do, it certainly creates a lot more opportunity when you're looking to go abroad, because it really does open the door where people ask, okay, how do you find work? Well, a lot of times you can find work doing what I would do is I go and look for jobs in New York and Boston, Los Angeles, and I write a cover letter. And in that cover letter, I say, I know ideally you're looking for somebody to work on site. However, I'd be flexible when it comes to salary considerations if I were able to remote and be on site for say 1 to 2 months per year, knowing that I could go visit a week here, a week there. And it's actually worked out for the past few years.
yeah, and I also think that so I studied abroad while I was at UMass in Barcelona, and I have always wanted to work and live abroad, and it ended up working out really well. But we've met quite a few expats since living here in London, and a lot of them put little planted seeds from the beginning. They told their boss that they were interested in working abroad. They knew that their company had branches in another country, and I think if you bring up that conversation with your manager or someone above your manager, or whoever it is that you feel comfortable as a mentor to speak with, I think you'd be surprised or not surprised at how flexible your company could be as far as relocating you. And I know that Richard and Shawn can speak to that. I'm sure almost all the panelists can, that your company could be quite flexible.
Yeah, I would say my experience, it's slightly different from the panelists that have spoken so far, in that it was far less planned. My company basically asked if I would be willing to live in London and work in our London office. And, for me, 5 years ago, I knew we had a small London office and I knew it was a possibility. So I kind of positioned myself throughout the early parts of my career to kind of gain the trust of the relevant managers to kind of eventually be the one that was asked to relocate to London. And going through a company like that makes the visa process incredibly easy. And it takes off probably the most stressful part about moving abroad, which is you wouldn't have a job necessarily right away. So you don't have to worry about that. So I see two different routes. One is definitely way more exciting, and you can choose wherever you want to go, and that sounds incredible. And the other option is, you can work for a global company, and hopefully, if you're a valued employee, depending on your skill set, that could open a lot of doors to go to a lot of neat different places that aren't in New Jersey, which was really important for me.
Yeah, I wanna just like go off of that point because my experience is very similar to Shawn's, and I applaud everyone on the panel who seems incredibly brave and are willing to, just put themselves out there and go find a role in a different country and go through the process. But yeah, I mean, I'm considered an expat, so my company moved me out here, and they take care of the visa process. They move your stuff. Like I'm lucky and fortunate enough that, they help me with like cost of living adjustments and tax equalization for the tax impact of living here and housing. So, I mean, I think it really depends on the way you want to go and the approach. And frankly, I think being at a company like mine, and I joined it knowing that we have really strong international growth objectives and that we aren't necessarily there yet. So really think about the industry that you want to join. If you're thinking about joining a larger company, what's the path to growing that industry and where are the growth drivers globally, right? So if you think about my old company, aerospace, airplanes, commercial travel, Asia is like a market that's taking off. And you can go there and, get a job in theory with a company that has a strong presence there. So to Shawn's point, you have to establish value and show that to some extent the company is willing to invest in you because you're a high performer. So you kind of have to get in there and roll up your sleeves and work hard. And, there's no guarantees, right? So it's a little bit of a longer term approach and a little risky, but, certainly I feel really fortunate to have this opportunity. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts and never really traveled outside the country. So every time, I'm out of the country or traveled for work to Southeast Asia or China or here in Europe, it feels like such a privilege. So, but yeah, there's definitely opportunities. Just pay, you can also work for a global company that's not a US based company. And obviously they'll have a strong presence overseas and they might value some of the skills that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of times it's also leveraging that exact point where that you're an American with a background working in the US, depending on what you do, whether it's finance, whether it's marketing, you have that market experience. And it's even more so than experience is expertise. And a lot of global companies that are foreign companies are actually looking to leverage that because if they have somebody who's willing to go to them with that experience, if they can justify it in their books, it makes more sense because they're getting invaluable information via that candidate versus hiring somebody locally and saying, okay, now go market to the US. Well, I don't know the US. Okay, well, this other guy over here, this other person lived there for, their whole life. So maybe it makes them more attractive candidates. So things that you don't even realize about yourself, basically where you're from is something very valuable when it comes to other companies looking to do business targeting Americans just because you are American.
Mm-hmm.
I'd add one more thing to that is that you have a lot of opportunity because it's surprising how many people are afraid of the world outside the United States. When I left my position in Tokyo and I'm looking for a replacement. So I'm looking for someone to be the director of marketing and sales for what I would argue is the best Disney resort in the world. It's a 6-figure salary. It's a car. It's a $10,000 a month apartment. Cost of living adjustments. It's like living at home with your parents, but they're not there. They're just paying all the bills. And I couldn't find anyone to replace me. It took me 8 months to find a replacement. Not because they weren't qualified people, it's just because people were afraid of living someplace like Japan, like Tokyo, which is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. They're just afraid. If you're willing to be a little bit fearless The world has so much opportunity. There's not a whole lot to fear.
It really brings up a good point. We've spent the last 17 years talking to people who are thinking about moving abroad and living abroad, but as you can see from the rest of the panelists here, it's a pretty self-selected group. These guys are kind of self-selected to be adventurous, to look forward to overcoming challenges instead of being intimidated by them, because living abroad is a different challenge every day. I mean, something different in the culture comes up and confronts you every day. And you either enjoy dealing with that and finding a way to incorporate it into your world, or you don't. And most people don't, frankly. The majority of people are very happy with the devil they know instead of taking a chance on the devil they don't know. And that can really work in your favor if you're looking to move abroad and do something there. Another thing that can work in your favor, as these guys have said, is having a specific area of knowledge. And it just could be the knowledge that you've acquired in life. If you have a specific area of expertise, now with the internet, people will pay to get that expertise from you. And it really doesn't matter where you are on the planet. Anybody can reach you and pay you for that expertise. So again, the internet has changed everything about that aspect of working abroad.
So there's a few questions. This is Karen. There are a few questions that have come in. So I'm going to switch a little bit and give you some of those questions. One of them was asking about how long it took to secure your job. And one of the people specifically wanted to know from Sofia, how long did it take for you to find your job after you relocated with your husband?
I guess I can start with that, and anyone can jump in. So Shawn and I, though we both went to UMass and knew each other all through UMass, we weren't married at the time, but when he basically was offered the position to relocate, we decided it's the opportunity that we've been wanting, so why would we say no? Let's do it. But I came over as a visitor. We looked into it. It's a very complex process. I recommend doing your research, and I could go on for a very long time about it. But in short, basically, you can go over as a visitor, and you have 6 months to be, I guess, legally in the country, and you can be looking for work, but kind of on the low, I suppose. But I kind of went over knowing, okay, well, let's go for 6 months. Let's see how it works out. At least I get to travel for 6 months and get to do something that I've been wanting for a while and was starting to get a little too comfortable in New Jersey. And so that's what I did. I work in marketing, and I thought being in hotels there's hotels everywhere. I was working in the biggest city in the States, and I really thought that because hotels are everywhere, it would be very easy to transfer. Had my hotel had a location in London, I easily could have transferred, just like Shawn did and just like Richard did. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case for me. So I actually came over with no job, had quite a few interviews, but because I was in marketing and I was specifically looking for hotels at the time, I actually, unfortunately, didn't have a lot of luck finding work. But I've met plenty of people since being here who did the same thing as me, and they have had success. It was a little bit discouraging, and I don't want to be completely negative about it, but it is possible, and I do want to let everybody on here know that it is possible. I just think it depends on the industry that you're in, and in retrospect, I do wish that I had maybe opened up to trying different industries where my skill set would be needed, specifically in hotels and in PR agencies here in London. They just didn't have the budget. I was looking at very, very, very small companies that just didn't have the budget to pay to sponsor me, but it is possible. I don't want to take too much time up, but we did, we ended up getting married back in the States, kind of, we were engaged and fast forwarded it a little bit, sped it up slightly, so that I could be over here. And from there, it was quite easy to find an opportunity. It really just comes down to the finances and whether or not the company has the ability to sponsor you, because the process can take between 3 and 6 months. And when there's an opening, they may want it filled right away, or they may be willing to wait. I have a friend who's going through the process right now, and she works in banking. So I do think that there are quite a few industries that are very open, and this is a completely normal topic, and people move all the time, and she's having success with it. So I don't want to bring any feelings down in the webinar. My personal experience, it didn't quite work out, but like I said, it's definitely possible.
Okay.
I
Great.
was going to say on that note.
Can I switch to another question? Oh, if you just want to briefly mention something, I have a few other questions too, Matt. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say on that note, I went through a similar experience this past time with Spain, and that I actually went through the reverse problem, which was I got a job in the United States where I was going to be able to work remotely. I went to the company in Hartford for 2 weeks, and then a day after I returned, they terminated me because I was basically, it was an issue with compliance of not being able to have patient healthcare data available overseas. And I was terminated, feeling a bit low, but I was fortunate enough to find a job in Spain. So in addition to just having my own business, I actually was able to get a job, but I had to broaden my horizons and think, okay, I want to be working in this vertical, but there's more jobs here. So I ended up actually taking a job with Norwegian Airlines, and I hadn't worked for an airline before, but it was the right fit just because I was able to make that small sacrifice by switching over to a different vertical.
Right.
Okay. So this is Karen again. So another question is, for individuals who are working abroad or looking to work abroad, how does that then look for a U.S. company when you return? How does that look for the Human Resources Office when they see that international experience? And is that always an asset, or also this person mentioned teaching English and saying, if I teach English abroad, will this just be looked as kind of a hobby type, this is a hobby person who wants to travel, or they see this as a serious job? So viewpoints for those who have then, after their first international experience, had to talk about their resume and their experience for that next job.
I would say for me, so part of the reason that I was selected to go abroad was because my firm was founded in 1989, and many of that founding generation started off working and living abroad. And as the firm had more and more success, kind of the risk profile of the types of people that they hired was suddenly completely different. It went from, hiring entrepreneurial types to people that wanted to work for a successful firm. So one concern that the founding generation had about younger employees was how parochial they were, how they lacked any international experience or appreciation of other cultures, which was especially bad when you're doing business on a global scale. So part of the reason that I was selected to go to London was exactly because I didn't have enough cultural experience in other countries. So I think that speaks pretty powerfully to how employers feel about any kind of international exposure, regardless of what kind of role you have.
Yeah, when I was working at the hotel in New York, we were always looking, because I mean, it's hospitality, it's travel. We were constantly looking at different countries, traveling to the US. Every year, NYC & Co. would put together a report that showed tourist statistics, tourism for New York City specifically. And actually the United Kingdom was one of our highest inbound markets. So for me personally, had I stayed with hospitality, it actually would have come in handy quite a bit when I came back, because I would have had a whole new insight into how the UK market operates, because it is very different than the US. You think of hotels and you think it's the same everywhere, but different strategies. Everyone has different different countries that tend to travel to them. So I can't really see a negative in working abroad. I think it just brings a whole different set of skills and insights when you do come back to the U.S.
I think there is potentially a negative. It depends on the company, and it depends on the industry. I worked 28 years abroad. I was an executive with the Disney Parks organization. When I came back to the U.S., many companies looked at that as, like I'd done it all in Fantasyland. It wasn't real because it didn't happen in the U.S. In the same way, I often saw executives in the company who had never lived or worked outside the U.S. visiting overseas locations, spending 6 hours there, and then lecturing everyone on what to do to make the place more successful, with no knowledge whatsoever, oblivious to the fact of how buffoonish they looked to all the people that had lived and worked in that market for years. So there is potentially a negative. It really depends on the company. It really depends on the executives in the company. Do your homework and understand what companies value international experience, because not all do.
Okay, we've got another question. This one is in regards to health insurance, and more specifically for people that are living and working overseas independently, perhaps doing consulting or freelance type work, not working for a large international company. Can you talk a little bit about how you handled health insurance?
Sure. We just went through this, in fact. I went to Merida, Mexico earlier this year with a torn rotator cuff and got it repaired in a wonderful facility in Merida, Mexico on our international insurance. There are a couple of programs out there that offer international insurance, and we're taking advantage of that right now because we just became Mexican residents and we haven't had time to sign up for the national health insurance program in Mexico, which we will do this year. But because we have been moving around so much in the last few years, we've had to pay kind of a premium for an international health insurance plan that covers us anywhere we happen to be in, at least throughout Latin America. We still come out a little bit ahead on having to self-insure if we had to self-insure in the United States. It's not the cheapest insurance in the world, but because we're Mexican residents and we will spend most of our time there this year, we will be able to take advantage of the national health programs in Mexico. And right now, there are two of them, Seguro Popular and IESS. You can take your pick, and the private health insurance as well. We don't have a company to rely on to handle that for us, so we take care of that ourselves. And we will be happy Mexican residents taking advantage of the local healthcare system as soon as we can.
For me, I would say for me, it's been pretty similar, similar to what Dan was saying, covering actually both. So living in Spain, I was part of the Spanish national healthcare system, which was very good in that it covered. I didn't actually need to use it for anything more than having a child with a milk allergy needing special formula. This formula would cost 60 euros a tin, needing 2 or 3 tins per week. You can do the math, it adds up over the span of 2 years, and it was completely free. So that was a benefit. But at the same time, like Dan said, I was using international insurance, which covered everything, including my wife's entire pregnancy was covered 100%. No deductible, no copay, just covered 100%. So if you're living abroad, do some research, look at the options, and there's a lot of different international insurance options that are pretty good, where you might pay a little bit more per month than you would normally be paying, but you'll find that 90 to 99% of everything will be covered, and that in itself is pretty good.
Okay, we've got another question here. The person is asking about resources for individuals looking for skilled positions in East Asia or other countries, any field, but more focusing on business and tech. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on resources for East Asia. Where to start?
There's a lot of resource chambers of commerce and also industry groups in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in Taipei, Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo. There are quite a few resources that are, you can also look at your U.S. chambers of commerce, because the U.S. keep chambers of commerce in most cities, or at least capital cities. So you'll find U.S. business groups in all the cities that I just mentioned, and those are a good starting resource. Okay, great.
In terms of starting the job search process, any recommendations on particular industries that seem easier for securing a job, specifically in Europe? Ones that maybe seem to hire a little bit more frequently? I don't know if anybody has thoughts.
Well, I think a lot of it depends on, if you're looking at industries, that a lot of it still depends on the specific tasks that you're working on. If you're talking, say, marketing, then agencies are a good place to look, because, meaning advertising agencies, marketing firms, because again, they're looking to market beyond just Europe. They're looking for some of that experience within the U.S. market. So if you have market experience in the U.S. and you want to live in Europe and they're based in Europe, well, it makes you a fairly attractive candidate. As for specific industries, I just left the airline industry in Europe after almost 3 years living in Barcelona. And let's say right now, with the rise of low-cost airlines, that's an area that, almost regardless of what specific area you're working in, whether it's finance, marketing, operations, it's an area to give a lot of serious consideration to, because it's now becoming cheaper to fly in some cases than it is to even take a train. So it's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, I would just think about what industries are growing globally, you know, which aerospace is a great one. The world will be flying more and more, as emerging markets become modern economies. People have more money to travel. So just think about the things that e-commerce, right? So if you can get in the door at one of these big e-commerce companies, they have presence all over the world, and you can find that you're going to want to be in industries that are growing. Just in terms of your work-life experience as well, I've found that if you're at a company that isn't growing, just the culture is not as good, right? It's less about growing the business and more about cutting costs in industries that don't grow. So do some research, follow the markets. For those of you who are interested in that or pursuing business degrees, try and understand where there might be opportunities, and then you can kind of see which companies are leaders and if they're hiring. It's a good place to start.
I was just going to say that what Matt talked about, agencies are a great place to be. If you don't know quite what industry you necessarily want to be in, or you don't necessarily have skills that channel you into one or another, working for some kind of a marketing agency or an ad agency is a good thing, because you will typically have a portfolio of a variety of clients. When I worked in an agency, I had Christie's Auction House, I had GE Aircraft Engines, I had McDonald's, I had all these different clients, and I could look, it gave me a window into each industry to understand where there's potential, what do I want to do, what I definitely don't want to do. So if you have them there for your mind, and you can get a position in an ad or a marketing agency, that's a good little stepping stone to kind of help you figure it out.
So another quick question that is coming up is also about finances. So in terms of bank accounts, having one in the States versus setting one up in that country, and then when you come back to the States and transitioning, so did people keep checking and banking open here in the United States during the whole time that they have been living overseas? How does that work? Anybody have thoughts?
I have a lot of experience with that, because again, deciding that I was going to get up and go to Argentina, I knew that I was going to essentially I wasn't going to be a permanent resident there. I didn't know how long I was going to be there, but I knew that I was basically just every 90 days going to be crossing the border, getting a stamp on my passport and coming back. And it's not entirely frowned upon. It just isn't technically the way that you want to have your immigration set up, but it's a bit of a loophole. So obviously you need a bank account. Well, I don't want to necessarily plug them, but they've been very helpful for me. I opened up a Charles Schwab account, and it's a brokerage account that comes with a free checking account. There's no international currency fees. There's no international ATM fees. So it's a 100% free account, and it's an interest-bearing checking account. So I would just use that for pretty much everything. Now, living in certain countries, obviously you need to have a local, if you're working locally, you need to have a local bank account so that you can have a salary sent, wired every month. Now, that's a little bit easier to do because if you are working for a local company, they'll likely help you with that. But if you are feeling that you're going to be moving around a lot and you want to keep some roots in the US, I'd recommend finding a bank account that will cost you little or nothing, and just hold on to it as long as you can.
Okay, great. In terms of resources, a person's asking about web pages because they said that when they do a Google search, they find lots of web pages where they want to charge you a fee to find work internationally. So in terms of resources that are reputable, that are going to get you some information and help you on that path.
For me, it's always been just using the same that I would use living in Los Angeles, living in New York, I was using abroad. A lot less options, but starting with LinkedIn, companies are still going to post on LinkedIn. And of course, depends on what you're using for keywords for your searches, but it'll kind of dictate whether or not you're getting results in English, or if you're looking in Budapest, a Hungarian listing. Obviously for me, if I was living in Croatia, a job posting that was in Croatian wasn't one that I was going to be able to apply to because it would have likely required speaking Croatian. But if results came up in English, then it was okay. But I never found that I needed to use anything that I needed to pay for. I was able to just kind of get by using the same free services that I would use anywhere.
Okay. I'm going to switch over to our career resources slide. We've had a lot of questions coming in, and it looks like we've had a great dialogue as well. So while I do that, the panelists are going to formulate their thoughts for some final items to share with you all. So just give me a moment, and we will pull up the career resources. So the Alumni Association provides a variety of career development resources, including UMass Amherst Alumni Advisors. We have career counselors, which are individuals that can offer you information either in person or virtually on different topics, including resume review, helping you find your path, salary negotiation, and other details. The Alumni Advisors program is where all alumni can go and become an advice giver, and any alum or student can go and seek advice. So you can have career conversations through a secure telephone connection with people from all over the world. We have networking opportunities through our in-person and virtual events. We have on-demand webinars, including this webinar, and its recording will be available on our webpage in addition to the other career webinars. And then we also have a Career Connect jobs portal. We also have the information on our webpage, umassalumni.com, where you can see the international alumni contacts. And on there, you can see several of the people from the panel that are contacts for us internationally. So sometimes when people say, I'm trying to build a connection with somebody who is in my UMass network, you can also visit our webpage and look at the information on there as well. So final thoughts from the panelists. Anybody want to jump in? Final closing thoughts?
I kind of want to, I guess it's a closing thought, but it also adds on to the last comment. I actually did use the Alumni Association to find quite a few jobs, Disney being one of them, my very first job out of school. But I also used it when I was here in London. I used LinkedIn, I used friends of friends, I used colleagues. I mean, you'd be really surprised at how many people are willing to help you, even if they hardly know you. When people are always willing to help, So use your resources, use the alumni network. There's a lot of us right here. There's a lot more than us out there as well. And I think you'd be really surprised at how much people are willing to help.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I'd say that I'd encourage anyone that really wants to do something very different. Try it. You'll find much more opportunity outside the U.S. than you will inside the U.S. as long as you're willing to, live a very different kind of life. Be aware that it does have its challenges, but in my experience, I would never change anything that I did. It was a very rewarding experience on all levels. And depending on how long you were away, your relationship to the United States is going to change. It's not going to be home so much anymore, and its relationship to you, you're not going to be looked on the same way anymore. So you're committing to a lot of change in your life, but beats the hell out of working in a cubicle in a cube farm somewhere, in some city in the U.S.
I just want to back up what Matt said. I talk to thousands of expats each year. Most of them are retirees or near retirees, but every one of them, almost to a person, even if they're not having a good time where they currently are, wish that they had done it sooner. So if you think you might be somebody who's cut out for the expat life, try it as soon as you possibly can and just find out. Even if it's not successful, then you'll know. And no experience is a bad experience. But if you are cut out for it, the sooner you start, the more fun you're going to have.
Yeah, I'd add to that just I think what I said at the beginning, which is there really is an emphasis on the research, and it doesn't have to be anything that is going to drive you crazy, but know the basics of immigration, the immigration policies for specific countries you're interested in. But once you get past that, really weigh everything, weigh all the different variables in the mix there. And I give the example, for me, it was Barcelona, Buenos Aires. Language, I knew I needed to improve my Spanish, either place that I went. Little did I know when I moved to Barcelona that I ended up speaking more Catalan than I would actual Spanish. But once you make those, when you weigh all your options, one is also factoring in some of the stressors. You're living in a new country. You're not going to necessarily know people right away. You might be lonely. I went there completely alone, just myself and a dog. And I met people, and it took some time. But I'm so glad that I made the smart choice at that point in my career to choose to go to some place that had a more favorable exchange rate, knowing that I wouldn't have to drive myself crazy working so hard to really stretch every penny. It really is a difference between, say, Dan mentioned living in Omaha versus, say, with Sofia and Shawn living in New York. It's a much different situation because you can really stretch out your money. So if you're looking to test something out, my only recommendation is to make sure that you factored in your finances just to cover the basics there. And you'll find you're a lot happier when you're going through a new experience when you're not struggling to pay the bills.
I would say, I would say I think it's great that you're on this call and interested in new experiences. Here in London, we've got to have all kinds of new and exciting experiences traveling around Europe. Listening to Dan makes me think that if you're in a position of power and you get to choose where you want to go somewhere where it doesn't rain every day. That I overlooked that, and there are a lot of trade-offs to consider. Most of which it's difficult to watch Tom Brady in prime time. So those are my parting thoughts.
Yeah, you'll miss your family and the creature comforts of home, but it's a valuable experience you'll take with you forever, and it opens your mind to other cultures and other perspectives in ways that you really can't appreciate until you experience it. So I know it's really helped me, and not only in my career, just really personally. So I would definitely recommend giving it a go if you can.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today on the webinar hosted by the UMass Amherst Alumni Association. Thank you also to Shawn, Chris, Richard, Matt, Dan, and Sophia for sharing so much information with us today and answering our questions. We'll be sending a link to a very brief participant survey to everybody to share your feedback on today's presentation. And a recording of this webinar will be available on the Alumni Association page shortly. If you have ideas for other additional topics that you'd like us to cover in the future, please include that information in the survey response, or feel free to email us at the office. We thank you for joining us for our career webinar today. From everybody here at the University of Massachusetts Amherst Alumni Association and all of our speakers, we wish you the best and thank you for joining us today. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.